Greeting, boys and girls. It's the Pulpwood Queen here for Storytime. And when I am ready for going back to fall, I always think about the scary stories and the ones that are really get me on the edge of my seat. When I was really small, I fell in love with Edgar Allan Poe. Yes, The Raven, one of my favorite poems ever. And as you can see, I have a little crow that has landed on my hat. So today, I'm doing a story time for children young at heart. And don't worry, moms and dads, it's not too scary. The book I want to tell you about is one that I went to a recent bookstore just down the road from me at Holly Lake Ranch, Gladewater Books. Oh, it's a treasure trove of children's books, vintage books, coffee table books, and autograph books, and all these wonderful used books. And I found a great book. I like to do story times for my grandson, Hawthorne, and he loves it when I dress up in character. So the book I'm going to do today is The Crows of Pear Blossom. This is a vintage book, boys and girls, and young at heart. Hi, Laura. Hi, Sally. Hi, Shanessa. This is by Aldous Huxley, and I love the illustrations by Barbara Cooney. So I'm going to read the book first, boys and girls, and then I'm going to show you the illustrations. The Crows of Pear Blossom. Well, once upon a time, there were two crows who had a nest in a cottonwood tree in pear blossom. Oh, boys and girls, I have a nest in my tree behind me. Can you all see the nest? And it's got eggs inside. Yes, you never know what wonders you might find at Murphy's Law. I have something for every story time I'm going to tell you. Well, once upon a time, there were these two crows, and they lived in a cottonwood tree at Pear Blossom. In a hole at the bottom of the tree lived a rattlesnake. He was very old and big, and when he shook his rattles, the noise was so loud he could be heard by all the children at school in Little Crock. Most of the time he slept, but every afternoon, punctually at 3:30, he used to crawl out of his hole, climb the tree, and look into the crow's nest. If there was an egg in the nest, which there generally was, he would swallow it in one mouthful, shell and all. Then he crawled back into his hole and he went to sleep again. When Mrs. Crow came back from the store, where she spent every afternoon to buy her groceries, she would find the nest empty. "Oh, what has happened to my darling little egg?" she would say as she hunted high and low. But she never found it. So after tea, she laid another one. Yes, she did. This had gone on for a long time when one day Mrs. Crow came home earlier than usual, and she caught Mr. Snake in the act of swallowing her latest egg. "Monster!" she cried. "What are you doing?" Speaking with his mouth full, the snake answered, "I am having my breakfast," and he glided down the tree and into his hole. When Mr. Crow came home that evening from Palmsdale, where he worked as assistant manager in the drugstore, he found his wife looking very pale and haggard, pacing up and down, outside their nest. "What's the matter, Amelia?" he said. "You look quite ill. You haven't been overeating again, have you?" "How can you be so coarse and unfeeling?" Mrs. Crow burst out. "Here I am, working myself to the bone for you. When I'm not working, I'm laying a fresh egg every single day, except Sundays, of course, and public holidays. 297 eggs a year, and not a single chick hatched out. And all you can do is ask if I've been overeating. And when I think of all that dreadful snake, I go all a tremble." "Snake?" Mr. Crow said. "What snake?" "The one that ate all my little darling little eggs," said Mrs. Crow. Crow and once again burst into tears. Well, when at last she was able to explain what happened, Mr. Crow shook his head. This is serious. This is the sort of thing that somebody will have to do something about. Why don't you go down into the snake's hole and kill him, said Mrs. Crow. Somehow I don't feel like that's a very good idea, said Mr. Crow. Abraham, you're scared, said Mrs. Crow. Scared, repeated Mr. Crow. I never said I was scared. All I said is I didn't think that was a very good idea. Your ideas are seldom good, I may add. That's why I shall go and talk to my friend Owl. Owl's a thinker. His ideas are always good. So he flew off to the tall poplar in Mr. Yost's garden, where Old Man Owl had his home. Old Man Owl, who worked on a night shift and slept all day, was getting up when Mr. Crow knocked at the door. Come in, Abraham, he said. Excuse me for being in my bedroom slippers. Mr. Crow took a seat, and while Old Man Owl shaved and combed his feathers, he told him the whole story. Well, said Old Man Owl, when he had finished, there's obviously only one thing that needs to be done. Well, what's that? Wait and see. And with that, Old Man Owl opened the door, and he flew down into the middle of Mr. Yost's alfalfa patch, which had been irrigated that day and was still quite wet. Oh, it's all muddy, said Mr. Crow, as he landed beside his friend. Abraham, you talk too much, said Old Man Owl. Keep your beak shut and do exactly what I tell you to do. So saying, he took a big handful of mud and began to shape it into the form of an egg. Mr. Crow did the same, and when they had finished, Old Man Owl flew up in the roof of Olivia's house just where the chimney came up from the living room. That stove was burning, and the chimney was very hot. Old Man Owl dropped the 2 eggs into a tin can and placed the tin can at the top of the chimney. Then the 2 friends flew back to Owl's house and had supper. By the time they had finished washing up and listening to the evening concert on the radio, it was 10 o'clock, and the moon was shining brightly over the mountains. I guess those eggs will be cooked by now, said Old Man Owl. So they flew back again to the chimney, and sure enough, the clay eggs had baked through and were as hard as stone. What color are your wife's eggs? Asked old Mr. Owl. Oh, they're pale green, said Mr. Crow, with small black specks. Well, it's lucky that Siggy has been doing some painting around the place, said Old Man Owl. And taking the can with the eggs, he flew down to the table outside the kitchen door, where there were several pots of paints and were brushes. When the eggs had been painted so they looked exactly like her eggs, the real eggs, Old Man Owl and Mr. Crow dried them over the chimney, and then about midnight, when the paint was quite dry and hard, they flew back to the old cottonwood tree, where Mrs. Crow was impatiently waiting for them. Well, she cried, which one of you has decided to go down the hole and kill the snake? Neither of us, said Mr. Crow. Neither of you, screamed Mrs. Crow. There must be 297 of my darling eggs disappeared down that serpent's throat. Oh, must my heart go on being broken day after day forever? Amelia, said Mr. Crow, you talk too much. Keep your beak shut and get out of your nest. Mrs. Crow did as she was told, and Old Man Owl took the eggs out of the can and placed them in the nest. What are those for? Asked Mrs. Crow. Wait and see, said old Mr. Owl. And with that, he flew off toward Llano, where he had an appointment with a friend to go gopher hunting. The next afternoon, Mrs. Crow went down to the store to do her usual shopping. While she was gone, Mr. Snake woke up feeling hungry. He came gliding out of the hole, up the tree, and along the branch to Mr. and Mrs. Crow's nest. 2 eggs today, he said. My turn. And he smacked his lips, for his mother neglected his education and he had very bad manners. Then he stuck out his neck and he swallowed the 2 eggs whole. First one and then the other. Oh my, boys and girls, what do you think is going to happen? Suddenly he broke off. Those eggs must have had very thick shells, he said to himself. Generally they break before they even get to my stomach. But this time it seemed to be different. All at once he began to have the most frightful stomach ache ever. Oh, he said, oh, but the stomach only got worse and worse. Oh, my stomach. Mr. Snake began to writhe and wriggle and twist and turn, and he twisted and turned so much that without knowing it, what he was doing, he tied his neck in a running bow knot around a branch and couldn't get loose again. Oh, but his tail was still free. He went to lashing out with that tail. And he lashed so furiously, he coiled and he corkscrewed into the most complicated convolutions that at last he got his tail tied up in a clove hitch around another branch of the tree. So there he was, and the harder he tried to get loose, the tighter the knot became. And all the time the clay eggs inside were giving him the most excruciating stomachache. By and by, Mrs. Crow came back from the store. At first, when she saw the snake, she was frightened. But as soon as she noticed how tightly he was tied up, she felt very brave and proceeded to give the snake a very long lecture on the wickedness of eating other people's eggs. Since that time, Mrs. Crow has successfully hatched out 4 families of 17 children each, and she uses the snake as a clothesline on which to hang the little crow's diapers. Oh, what a tale to tell. Mr. and Mrs. Crow, they were looking out for their babies. Well, what I love about the illustrations by Barbara Cooney is when you open the page, look at all the eggs. And did you know crow's eggs were green with black dots? It's very interesting, all the different colors that the bird's eggs are. And here they are, looking at Scamp, that snake up in the tree. Mr. and Mrs. Crow just do not know what they're going to do. And see the nest up at the top? Well, they devised a plan, all right. And here's a picture of Mr. Crow painting those clay eggs. Isn't that fun? Here they are, boys and girls, at their nest. You know, it wasn't too long ago. Last spring, I had 2 baby buzzards born up in the nest in front of my house, and I watched them grow because their mother taught them flying lessons off my back deck. And I studied them and I learned a lot about them. They're nature's garbage disposal. They clean up all the dead animals on the side of the road. I have a new respect for buzzards, I can tell you. I named them He and Haw. And then one day they flew off and I've never seen them since. Here's the snake. He's old. And look at him in the bed, boys and girls. He is one bad snake, so always be careful around snakes. If you see one, you go backwards and get your parents. Here's Mrs. Crow going to the store, and as you can see, she has on a lovely chapeau, just like me. Here's Mrs. Crow giving the snake what's for eating all of her little eggs. I don't think that snake was paying one bit of attention. Not at all. So they thought about it and they thought about it. And you know what happened? Finally, Mr. Crow said, you know, I'm going to go talk to my wise old friend, Mr. Owl. Here he is shaving and combing his feathers while the crow is patiently waiting on him. And he comes up with this wonderful idea of making eggs out of mud balls. I did a story time a little while back. Yes, and it was about mud pies. So here they're making mud balls into eggs. Maybe we'll make some eggs out of mud. That could be a fun activity for us. We could paint them green with black spots like a crow. Here they are painting the eggs. What a fun activity, boys and girls. I want to make a clay egg. Now, as you can see, they're going to talk about what they're going to do, the plan they have set to get Mr. Snake. And here comes the snake, and this time he's after he thinks he's going to get a feast because he sees 2 eggs, but what he doesn't know is they're made out of clay that's been baked to stone. Oh, Mr. Snake is in for a big surprise. Here he is up on the branch. He's kind of got a little bit of a stomach ache. So he starts wiggling around, and that crazy snake ties himself up into a knot. So he starts whipping his tail around, trying to get loose. And you know what he does? He really gets himself in a bind. He can't get loose, and the more he wiggles and squirms, the more he locks up. So Mrs. Crow lets him have it. She said, "How dare you eat all my babies? It serves you right." And what I think is really funny about it is at the end of the story, the snake ends up being the clothesline for her little crow's diapers. What an imagination this writer had on writing this book. Do you think maybe you could write a story about a crow and maybe draw some drawings too? If you send them to Miss Kathy at thepulpwoodqueen@gmail.com, I will post them on my next story time. So let's see if we can all draw a crow and tell a crow story, because there's always wonderful stories like the Edgar Allan Poe stories, The Raven, one of my favorites. And I got these books at, again, Gladewater Books. Now, they're paying me nothing to do this. I'm just trying to support independent bookstores. It's a vintage used bookstore in Gladewater, Texas. Fantastic owner. He is so helpful. I can't thank him enough. I can't thank you enough for watching my story time. I have more that are in the works. Please share them with your families and have watch parties. Maybe you can get a library card, or maybe you can think about going to your favorite independent bookstore and seeing if you could go at least pick up books on curbside service. If you want to order books, go to bookshop.org. This helps independent bookstores all across the country. And I want to thank you for watching my story time. If you want to see all of them, go to The Pulpwood Queen. Well, actually, it's Kathy L. Murphy channel, and it's going to have The Pulpwood Queen Story Hours on it on YouTube. Go to YouTube and type in Kathy L. Murphy channel, and you'll see all the videos that I'm creating to help us give wonderful social distancing book experiences. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you tomorrow night at my Pulpwood Queen Film Club that starts at 6:30 for my pre-show. We're going back to school watching the wonderful film To Sir with Love starring Sidney Poitier. So every Saturday night at 6:30 for the pre-show. And it's so exciting because I've got producers and actors and all kinds of different people going to join us throughout the year. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. It's all about the story. Bye-bye.